head. Like I had it in my melon that it didn't matter, just find someone and make her happy. By the way, you can't make somebody be happy.
Right, no.
And I believe that would help me feel like myself. My fear too is that other people see that I can't get women, right? Enough. If other people see that, that makes it 10 times worse. And I'm afraid that other people will think that I can't get girls, right? When you're young.
Right.
So that created a sense of frantic desperation. And I think that's the mental state you get into where you just you're willing to accept just about anything and rationalize it.
Yeah.
So, coming from someone who once had incredibly low self-esteem, no sense of self-worth, that's what it was for me when I was younger.
Yeah, I've gone through phases of that. I think there was a great stretch of time where I always had some girl on the side. I was never officially single. I always had a girl I could date, a girl that I could call up and hang out with on a moment's notice. In some ways, I feel like I kind of do now, but I'm not coddling those relationships. I'm not, making sure that they're always available. I've been more upfront with them, and it's like, hey, I'm digging my tunnel. I don't have time for a relationship right now. I don't have time to, spend the time with you that you want me to. But, if you need to go out with somebody, or you need somebody to go see a show with you, or show up at a party that has been prearranged or whatnot, hit me up and I'll see if I'm available. But I'm not going to designate my time for that. And before I used to always have time, or I was always trying to make time with somebody to keep that relationship going. Where now I'm not super invested in all that. I know that it's either there or not there, and I'm fine either way.
Yeah. So I guess my next question is, why is loneliness such a bad thing? Or why is it? I'm not saying loneliness is good.
Right.
Why is it so dreaded? Why do guys dread loneliness so much? What do you think?
I think it goes back to feeling abandoned, and that's an empty feeling. I also feel like we're always going to be lonely in some way, So when you break it down, is it so bad? Is it such a bad thing? It's how you manage to cope with the situation that's going to acceptance of the fact that there's going to be loneliness, and now what do I do, versus having to fill that void with a relationship that may or may not be in your best interest.
Right. Yeah, and you made a good point earlier that I like, is that being in a really bad relationship and not knowing how to end it. And I'll be honest, man, I feel like you and I are two of the few guys that you and I know that have not been through a horrible divorce. I mean, you've been divorced.
Yeah.
But yours have been relatively...
They've been pretty smooth, yeah. Admittedly, I'm definitely fortunate.
Yeah, and our mutual friend,
right?
He's still, years later,
still going to court.
Yeah, and spent 2 days in court a couple weeks ago, and still is waiting for a decision. And we're lucky. I feel like you and I are kind of fortunate that we have not been in a situation where there's no good way out.
Right.
And I do agree that is a good podcast or a good topic for a future episode.
Yeah.
But I really believe the bottom line here is that being in a bad relationship results in greater loneliness.
Right. Like you mentioned in the article, you feel more isolated in a bad relationship because you can't be fully self-expressed. Right. And how limiting is that when you can't even be who you are just because you don't want to rock the boat or, make any waves in your relationship. That's where nice guys kind of get to that whole point of avoiding conflict like the plague.
Right.
And then are you really getting your needs met because you're afraid to speak up and say where you're not having satisfaction in your relationship?
Right. And I think what you're talking about too kind of goes back to, I feel like one of our core values at Orion is identity.
Yeah.
Does your relationship sort of require you or attempt to require you to give up your identity? And one question that people will often ask is, well, you have to make some compromises and some adjustments in a marriage, for example, to make it work.
Sure.
But where do you draw the line between what you should change and what you shouldn't change? And to me, it's like it's one thing to change a bad habit, like clean up after yourself, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's different from like change who you are at a core level to suit who I think you should be as a person.
Yeah, that's a much more difficult task.
Right. And well, you shouldn't do that. And I think that's where too many guys are getting lost in relationships these days, is that nice guys are so notorious for this. They even lack a sense of who they are because they've just given it up so much.
Right.
If their relationship ends, then they're stuck sitting with this sense of, I have no idea who I actually am.
Right. So let me just kind of break this down, where I'm at in my life now anyway. I've dated several women since I've been divorced, and I've been able to assess how the relationship is going to fulfill my needs and wants by being a part of it. And I'm able to make a decision before things get too seriously involved to know when to walk away because of that. And it feels more empowering. It definitely feels more being true to myself because of it now. So I don't hold anything back now when I start a relationship. I try to be as open and honest as I can, even if it's brash or, I tell situations that I've been in to just kind of throw it out there, what I've accepted in the past and what I'll no longer accept. And I've noticed now, like there's a girl that I've dated recently who, she's not as communicative as I'm used to having or that I like to have. And I enjoy that back and forth mentioning of like, how was your night? How did you sleep well? What are you up to today? Like, just, I'm not trying to know everything about them. I'm not trying to be all up under their business, but it's nice to know that somebody's caring about what's happening in your day. If you're going to get involved with somebody, that's, I think, one of the benefits of that relationship is knowing that somebody else is also like, having their life and you're included in that in some way, shape or form, and they're including you by sharing that with you.
She emotionally unavailable?
She's just not available now. Like I just can't reach her sometimes, and I'll say something and she doesn't respond, and I don't message her back because I'm not desperate. I'm not gonna show that I'm like, oh, I need you to get back to me, and then I hear back from her like a couple of days later, and I'm like, whatever. I don't put any stock in like trying to cultivate that relationship again. I've laid out my agenda in before things have gotten any farther, as far as like I'm not ready for a relationship. I'm doing this and that and the other. So I don't want to like tell her, hey, like let's just not even talk anymore, because it's nice every once in a while to like go and hang out and get together when we can, because I'm not trying to create this relationship. But I've also like told her, hey, I'm used to a little more communication than this, and so if you're not going to communicate, then neither am I, and then it's just kind of left out in the open, and that's fine. And I've done that too, like with girls that I know are more interested in me
than you are with them.
Yeah, and they would probably like me to be more communicative with them. I've been able to express to them, look, I'm busy doing other things, and I'm not going to really reach out to you unless I've got something to do, an event or something. But I've kind of laid the groundwork ahead of time. And that makes a huge difference versus like always sitting around pining and waiting and hoping and, checking your messenger and see if they've like checked your last message. It just seems like a whole nother sense of desperation and not being true to yourself either. You know, why are you willing to accept that? Why are you willing to put yourself in that type of turmoil when you could just go do what you need to do and not let that be the drama of your relationship?
Yeah, and I'll tell you where I'm at. This is because we're working on our own growth.
Absolutely. Daily.
I try to daily. Sometimes, like this morning, I had a frustrating morning. It's just like I'm just trying to take care of the basics right now. But
yeah,
and that's the reality of life sometimes, guys. But like I'm gonna use a metaphor here. If there was a guy who was like the designated person for scraping corpses off the road after a motorcycle accident,
yeah,
he wouldn't want to ride a motorcycle.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like I'm that guy.
Because of what you do.
Relationships, man.
Yeah.
And the stories I've heard. And I know I'm at a place where it's like, I know there are a lot of great motorcycle riding. This is all metaphorical, right?
Sure.
A lot of great motorcycle riding out there, and a lot of great motorcycles. There's a lot of people loving their motorcycles, but I'm pretty cautious about getting on one.
Right. I don't blame you. and I don't blame you for what the metaphor stands for either. I get that. When you see how rough relationships can be, it's
I have a skewed. Yeah, I do, man. I have a very skewed perception.
Yeah.
Just from the work that I do, and especially kind of working in the men's spheres and the men's work field.
Yeah.
Where I feel like the guys that have really kind of fallen behind in terms of making their needs a priority and standing up for themselves and being assertive and almost adopting this almost helpless, hopeless type of identity where they're not assertive. They're not really taking a firm stance. It's like it can be discouraging to watch those guys.
Oh yeah.
Let alone be one, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't feel like I am that guy, fortunately, because I'm not. I mean, I met with a client yesterday, and sometimes he just has this complete defeatist attitude. And if you ask me, that is often the result of a bad relationship. It's far worse. Far worse. And so I think my challenge to guys is that it's okay to be alone.
Yeah.
And I think as guys too, we need to support each other when it comes to like, if like you said, we need to be that friend where like, dude, she's not good for you.
Yeah.
You need to do better. You need to leave that relationship. This one is not. I mean, you're losing yourself. Like we hear that sometimes. You're losing yourself,
yeah.
And basically it means you're giving up your identity, right?
Yeah.
You're losing yourself in this relationship. I think we need to support each other. I think we need to look out for each other. I think it's okay for us to face loneliness. We will adapt and overcome and get a better sense of who we are. I feel like that's been my experience.
And not be afraid to reach out to other guys when you're in that funk. Instead of feeling like you need a relationship, you've got guy friends. You should have guy friends.
Yeah.
You should have somebody that you can go hang out with or see what they're doing, watch a game together, share a beer somewhere, like just go play catch, something that you still are connected to somebody. You don't need to disconnect yourself just because you're not with a girl, which is weird. We had that conversation, like guys alienate their friends when they get in a relationship. That bond that you have with other guys needs to be consistent no matter what relationship you're in.
Yeah.
Whether you're single or whether you're totally romantically involved.
100% agree, and I sort of had this friend. He was a friend of mine. I've known him for a long time, but his marriage went so badly and custody battle and all that stuff, and if I say anything about his ex-wife that is unsavory, he gets angry at me. And at some point I'm like, dude, I'm not the bad guy.
Right. I'm just pointing things out.
Yeah. Well, he went through a whole really, really bad relationship. The stories he tells me, and maybe it's a one-sided story, and I can only, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
but what if he says it's true? Then it's like, wow, that was bad. That was really bad. And it's troubling to see it progress and advance to the point where it's that bad. Right. Where according to him, she's slapping him.
Oh boy!
I told you to get milk.
Wow.
That's what. Sleep in the backyard. You're sleeping in the backyard.
What? Jeez.
These are just. I don't know if they're accurate.
Right, but even still, like if that comes up in a relationship, that you'd have to stop and go,
I know. Maybe
this isn't so good.
Yeah, and but it is a dark place for the I talked to a guy recently. His job is very stressful and he dreads going home. Uh-huh. What would that be like? You go to work and you dread it. You go home, you dread it. It's awful. And so this is why guys need to support other guys, right? Yeah. This is probably a whole other topic, but where do guys meet other guys? How do they make friends? Guys have forgotten how to do that. Yeah. It's actually not that hard. Guys are pretty basic.
We're simple creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, friendships are basic with guys. Yeah. Guy friendships are actually easy. Yeah. Easy.
There's all kinds of meetup groups where you can go and do something that you're interested in, like a hiking meetup group, a biking meetup group. There's all these things that you can sign up for, like kickball and softball and
there's all that dodgeball meetup.
Yeah, and then you go hang out with guys that are doing what you like to do, and it's not hard to make friends in those circumstances.
Yeah, and so bottom line, right? To me, for this episode is taking a bad relationship because it's somehow in your perception, guys, to be alone, you actually end up way, way, way worse off. Right. And our solution to that is find your identity. Yes. Build your self-esteem. Figure out who you are. Learn to like yourself. Get some confidence. And have good guy friends.
Right. And make an honest assessment of your relationship. Here's the other side of that story. So for me, anyway, I think my last marriage got to a point where my ex-wife wasn't satisfied either, and she stayed with me as long as she did because I was a good guy, right? I treated her well. I gave her the freedom that she wanted, but she wasn't happy being in that relationship either. And in a way, I think she didn't want to break up with me because she didn't want to break my heart. She didn't want to hurt me. But in truth, after we separated and moved on, she did me a favor. I felt relieved, and I was able to move forward and realize that I could share a life with somebody else and not be in a situation where I wasn't happy. And I think if you're in a relationship that you're in out of convenience, not because it makes you happy, and you realize that you're miserable, just think about them as well on some level. If you're thinking about walking away, if you walk away, you're actually helping them in their life too. Right. You're not keeping them in this relationship so that they can find somebody that does fulfill them more. And it's okay to let that go and walk away.
And I think we've mentioned this before, and there is truth in the old cliche that if you love somebody, let them go.
Yes, absolutely.
If you really care about someone, move on. Yeah, absolutely move on. But I guess one of my parting notes here is how do guys really know when the relationship is bad? What are the tall signs that, like, and sometimes there's just power and acceptance and recognition of just being like, man, this because guys stay committed. Yeah. And I hear nonsense from guys, by the way, like this, like, I promised I would do anything to make this work. And it's like, but
where do you have to draw that line?
Keeping each other sick.
Yeah.
Keeping each other from finding true happiness. Right. Why what is this nonsense about? Oh, like I don't know. I almost feel like guys hope that will give them a sense of meaning and purpose, but it's like, if you're really keeping yourself from finding what is really good for you, but what are the signs? What are the indicators that your relationship is like?
Well, things that you wouldn't have tolerated before. When you see things like that happening in a relationship, like abuse, like things where you always feel wrong, if you feel like you're always walking on eggshells.
Here's one of mine. Do your balls jump in your throat?
Yeah.
Like, phone rings, it's in your pocket, you pull it out, her name is on. Do your balls jump in your throat?
Right.
That's sort of mine, right? Where
yeah.
that, like, I started paying attention to that. Like, why are my balls jumping in my throat? And I realized, like,
this is not a good relationship then.
Yeah, like, this is not a good situation. This is not working. This is not a good thing. This is where I have to be honest with myself and be like, I want it to be great. It's not.
Yeah. If you find yourself not being fully self-expressed, so swallowing things that you would normally say because you don't want to rock the boat, if you catch yourself doing that, ask yourself why am I not saying this, if you find yourself venting when you get to your car by taking it out on your passenger seat, like, why are you doing that? What is the stress factor that's causing that misery for you?
Do you consistently feel relieved when you part?
Yeah.
And consistently feeling dread when you're
back together.
Yeah.
Those are definite signs. And then, of course, like we mentioned, when your friends are telling you somebody's bad for you, that's a sign. Those are definite signs as to why it's not working.
Yeah. So, as a parting shot, one thing that we're wanting to do at the Orion Way is provide an online community for guys to get the support from other guys.
Yes.
Because so many guys are missing that. And there are, let's be honest, there are guys out there, they're dicks.
Yeah, for sure.
There's always those guys like, don't be a pussy. Those guys,
yeah.
I call them the don't be a pussy guys. Like,
yeah.
Can we not? Like, we need each other right now.
Right.
Guys need each other.
We don't need to be fostering that kind of attitude.
Yeah, so, make sure you go to the orionway.com, check out our online community for, at the time of recording this, it is still under construction.
But it's going to be up soon.
It'll be up.
We also have a Facebook page, and that's a great way to start talking and meeting other guys that are interested in what you're interested in.
Yeah, and subscribe to the newsletter and get the content and material on effective and really like the effective ways to think and do and be.
Absolutely.
Effectiveness.
And also, if you're a Salt Lake native listening to this, we have a seminar coming up in July 20th and 21st. We'll have details about that also on the orionway.com/events.
Yeah.
Check that out and see if that's something that'll help you.
Even just the greater northern Utah area.
Right.
Southern Idaho. Evanston, Wyoming, we're talking to you. It's like 12 people there. But...
Eli, Nevada.
I think it's Ely.
Oh, Ely. All right.
Don't go to Ely and say Eli. They'll run you out of. They'll run you out of their trailer park.
Or Elko. How about that? That's
all right. Way. Thanks for listening.
All right. 45 minutes. 49 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I started this thing a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think about maybe cranking out a half-hour episode on leaving a bad relationship?
Yeah. Let's do it. I was actually going to write a book. I'll mention that.
Wait, on what?
When I wrote So You Want to Get Married, Huh?
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know if you had... so I was actually writing a second book, and I haven't gotten around to it. I just did the outline from... I'll just start over.
Yeah, are you just going to dive into that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we want to do Boys Will Be Boys, so we'll just start over.
Yeah, and that's okay. Pick up, say what you're gonna say, and
okay.
And while I'm gonna bring the story up, so you just dive into what you want to dive into about.
All right. Welcome back to the Orion Way of Life podcast. I'm Anthony Lovato, and with me, as always, Scott Carter.
Hey, everybody.
Licensed therapist, by the way. So I was mentioning earlier. One of the earlier podcasts, So You Want to Get Married, Huh? At the very end of the book, I talked about a title that I have not yet written called How to Get Out of a Bad Relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. There's a lot of material that could be written about that, and that's what this podcast discussion is going to be about, which is a big deal.
It is a good topic. I agree. It's a very good topic.
Right, and the key is holding on to your end goal. What is it that you want when you're deciding to get out of a relationship? You know, why are you doing this? To get, and here's the thing: like in a relationship, there's a lot of guys that when you're in a relationship you want out, and when you're not in a relationship you want in. and so you have to like really stop and think about that for a minute. Why do you want out of a relationship? If it's a good relationship, it makes no sense to want out of it. But if it's a bad relationship, then yeah, you probably should get out of it, because there are plenty of fish in the sea. It's definitely worth looking at those other opportunities.
Right.
But like, don't go and cheat on your relationship to get out of it. You know, that's like an awful way, I think, to do it. That's kind of a chicken shit way, in my opinion.
Totally. Oh, I totally agree.
So I wouldn't recommend that as a way to get out of a bad relationship. You know,
it's effective.
It's effective, sure, but that's not really a healthy way to do it. And you'll come off better if you do that through the methods that we're going to talk about in this podcast.
Right. And what I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about or say is, and I try to point this out to guys when they're trying to end a bad relationship, is if you end it in certain ways, you're going to feel way worse about yourself.
Oh, yeah.
If you feel way worse about yourself, you're going to end up making another bad decision down the road. You're more likely to jump into another bad relationship. You're just prolonging the cycle. So our topic is
how to get out of a bad relationship.
But first, we're going to do Boys Will Be Boys. And while I kind of cue this up, maybe a little bit, Anthony, on what Boys Will Be Boys segment is about.
Sure. So in the news, we hear a lot of awful things about men doing awful things. And that doesn't give the culture around men actually are pretty special. We do a lot of great things. It just doesn't get talked about, right? I was actually noticing this when I drive. I when I'm driving, sometimes I'm often bitching about people who cut me off, or, you know, like, what the hell are you doing? I find myself saying that a lot. All right, come on, people, let's drive here, right? Yeah. But when I started thinking about the Boys Will Be Boys and looking for the good in things, I started realizing that while I'm driving, I often have not really noticed that there are a lot of great drivers around me,
right,
that are actually following the rules and are making it easier for me to drive. And I started acknowledging that and saying, wow, there are people who are good drivers. It changed the perspective of the way that I drive now.
Precisely the purpose of this segment.
Yeah.
And I do try and like I've been in my car where I'll be like, hey, you know what? That's a good turn. Way to turn, you. Good job. You know, I'm just
or nice use of a signal.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for letting me know.
Right. Good job, you.
Right.
I appreciate your good driving. Right. So, this Boys Will Be Boys story comes to us from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so 4 boys. Okay. Let me hit the headline. 4 teens rush into burning home to rescue their 90-year-old neighbor. Okay.
Wow.
So 4 boys between the ages of 14 and 17 went outside to leave for just go to a convenience store, and they smelled some smoke. They heard a house alarm go off, and they called 911. So this old lady, according to her, the smoke was so bad I couldn't get out of my room. I couldn't see. I felt along the wall. I ended up in the closet. She's 90 years old, for crying out loud.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And 14-year-old Nick Bird, he managed to get through the backyard or back door and run inside. He found her in the hallway. The young boy was right there, she said. I wonder if you could do an old lady voice.
Hey, the young boy was right there.
He picked me up.
A young boy was right there, and he picked me up.
So these 4 boys, just going about their day. These 14 boys, just doing kid stuff. Saw a burning home and did the right thing. Jumped into action, saved the day. So Nice work, fellas.
Good on you. Yeah, way to step up and take care of your neighbor who probably couldn't have got out of there on her own.
She probably likely would have died from smoke exposure, and then from there, not good. But good job, fellas.
Yeah, not that we condone like putting your own life at risk, but if you feel like you could have pulled that off, and whatever. But
these kids are heroes.
The kids are heroes, and that's where heroes are made, is making decisions in the moment and taking the proper action.
Yep. So we catapulted into the topic of this episode on the heels of recording the previous one.
Right.
Ending a bad relationship, and the previous one has plenty of information on what bad relationships might look like.
Yeah.
But I have ran into plenty of guys that recognize this is a bad relationship and there is no easy way out.
Yeah. So the title of the book I was going to write, like I mentioned, the full title was How to Get Out of a Bad Relationship Without Murdering Your Spouse. And the reason I was going to call it that was because at the time that I wrote it, there was a lot of cases going on, like the Peterson trial. You hear about the guy who like took his wife out in the ocean and dumped her in the ocean, and there's some guy in Washington or California, and then here locally there was Mark Hacking. Did you hear about that guy?
I went to school with that guy's brother.
Oh, geez. Well, he lived in the same neighborhood as me. Like, we went to the same Maverick.
Oh, so did you ever meet him?
I passed. I'm sure I passed him.
I knew his brother in high school.
Jeez. So Mark Hacking was married. He was a professional liar, I guess you could say, to some degree. But like, he murdered his wife and dumped her into a dumpster, and that was his way of getting out of a bad relationship. That's how he did it, and I think that Peterson guy did the same thing. There was another guy here that like buried his wife in the desert. You remember hearing about that?
No.
And like with his kids. Like,
oh, jeez.
And
well, how about this one? The guy that crashed his airplane. And did you hear about that?
No.
That was last year sometime. Not too far from here. This guy crashed his airplane into his house where his wife and daughter were sleeping, and he died. They didn't.
So it had the opposite effect of what he wanted.
Well, but he still got out.
Right. But then, like, is that really,
come on, guys.
Like, come on. There's definitely a better way to do it. And, taking it from a guy who has been divorced a couple of times. Well, I've been divorced 3 times. We've mentioned this before, right?
At least you're forthcoming about it. I've been divorced 0 times because I've never been married.
Yeah, I married my first wife twice.
Right. And I kind of count that as one.
It's one wife for sure. But like, I had to go through 2 divorces. The first divorce was kind of... it was me just asking for it because she had already asked for the separation and things weren't working, and I told her, look, maybe we should file the paperwork now, and if you change your mind, we can stop the paperwork from going through, or we'll just make it happen. But then we got back together after that. There's a long, convoluted story of how that worked out.
Right. That all of us have sort of been through to some degree or another.
Yeah.
I feel like.
And part of what got me back together with her was also part of what made me realize that I needed to get out, for sure, the second time around. And it wasn't a good situation, really. She wasn't working because she had kind of a nervous breakdown and was dealing with some issues that she put on the back burner in her life, and now we're coming to the forefront, and that was causing a problem. The second thing was, we never fought. Like, her and I never got into any fights. And maybe we should have, but we didn't, because we didn't really have a whole lot to fight about, unless we like fought about our sex life, which, was not going to be worth fighting over. That's just silly, because then you wouldn't get any sex. I don't know, there's debate about that. However, I knew that I had to get out of this relationship because it wasn't working for me. I wasn't fulfilled. I felt like she was draining all the energy out of me. I didn't want to be at the house. I'd have rather been out and about. I started thinking evil thoughts like, what if she gets killed in a car accident? Then I can get out of the relationship without breaking her heart. And
man, I felt that way about jobs, where I hoped I'd get in a car accident so
you didn't have to go to work.
Yeah.
But I was like, that's no good either. That, that's just a clear sign that I shouldn't be in this relationship. So I started pulling away. And I think that's the key, is like you have to start pulling away. Even if it's not making it verbal, start doing things away from the relationship. See if you can do things that are noticeable to her that make her believe that you're avoiding her. Because once you start establishing separation, then it's easier to talk about separation. I think that's the key.
And not because I'm trying to be a one-upper.
You sure?
But when I think of bad relationships, because you have not been through like what some of the other guys I've seen have been through.
No.
And I have seen a lot of guys that have been in relationships with women who have a personality disorder.
Right.
Borderline or narcissism.
Yeah.
And those are very, very hard relationships to end.
Yeah.
That's sort of that's almost a different topic of sorts. But when you're talking about a bad relationship, like I feel like you and I aren't different.
Yeah.
Because you were in a relationship that you felt like was bad, but it sounded like ending it was not, like your life wasn't destroyed in the process.
No, I mean, luckily we didn't have any kids together. We did own a house together.
Yeah.
But she wanted to go to marriage counseling, and I just knew that marriage counseling wasn't going to be the answer either.
Yeah.
And I think that's in your line of work. I think a lot of people go to marriage counselors just to prove to their significant other that they made an attempt, but really they've already had their minds made up.
Yeah, either that, 100%. Either that, or well, usually it goes like this: one person, and it's sometimes it's the husband, sometimes it's the wife. One person wants to be validated by a therapist. I'm right, you're wrong. The other person is going begrudgingly.
Sure.
Just to show, look, I'm showing up because you're forcing me to.
But they know they're going to be a punching bag.
And they hold a grudge against the whole process.
Right.
Unfortunately, I do often hear stories about therapists that do take a side.
Huh.
And the good ones are going to be impartial.
Right.
They're going to be actually. When I was in grad school, there's this brilliant instructor there, and he asked us. He said, like, in marriage counseling, who is your client?
The marriage.
The marriage, exactly.
Yeah.
Anthony passes. Yes, the relationship is the client. The husband nor the wife, or whatever, both husbands and both wives, whatever may be the case, are not the client. And the good marriage counselors will remain impartial. I digress a little bit, but like, have you ever talked to, like, I know that you do a lot of your own work kind of in the area with guys in relationships.
Yeah.
And you give guys a lot of advice on, matchmaking, and is this person good for you versus not. Have you ever talked with a guy who's in one of those, like, super enmeshed relationships with a borderline narcissist?
Yeah. And they're like, how do I get out of this? Right.
Yeah.
So
that's tough.
It is tough. And they're irrational. There's not a whole lot
totally irrational.
There's nothing logical you can say or do. And in those circumstances, one of my philosophies is fall on the sword, dude.
Meaning? What do you mean by that?
Be the bad guy. Be the bad guy. If she tells you that, you're a coward, or that you're not even trying, or that you're weak, any of those things.